This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and today I'm with Alia Middleton, Dr. Alia Middleton, who's a lecturer in politics at the University of Surrey. Welcome to the Guildford Dragon, Alia.
Thank you.
And we're going to just reflect and analyse further the Surrey County Council elections. So what conclusions have you drawn from those elections?
Well, they're inevitably fascinating, as any election is to a psephologist like me. I think what is marked that we have seen a substantial decrease in the number of seats captured by the Conservatives. And I understand that this is actually the worst result by the party since 1993. So, on the one hand, it's a particularly bad picture in that respect. But if we look at the representation of other parties, we aren't really seeing substantial gains, a real challenge to that Conservative majority on the council. Of course, it has come down, but we're not quite seeing that that opposition rise as much as we might perhaps expect to at this point in an incumbent Conservative administration at Westminster. One thing that it's a common theme in local elections, and in terms of Surrey County Council elections, it's no different. The very low turnout, extremely low turnout when we compare it again to national elections. This is not solely individual to Surrey, but I do think it's something that does need to be addressed, not just at the county level, but across the country when it comes to these local elections. The only time we actually do see local elections rise in turnout and actually on a par with general elections is when they actually happen on the same day. Roughly speaking, local election turnout, and Surrey is no different, bumbles around the kind of 30 to 50% mark. And so it's really, really thinking about how we can better engage the local population with what is fundamentally really a key opportunity to understand and have their views represented at the local level.
Yes, and would a risk be of, it was the borough election did coincide with the general election in 2019. No, is that right? No, not in 2019, but it has done in the past. But isn't the risk there that then you get national issues dictating the way people vote on local issues?
I think the difficulty there is even at the local level, in a local election that is entirely separate from general elections, national perspectives, national opinions about party leaders do always filter down to that local level. So you're never going to decouple national and local issues entirely. It's just about potentially giving people an additional motivation for actually going to that polling station in the first place. And we shall see how the various measures towards voter identification evolve and how they might actually potentially affect turnout at the national and local level.
Okay, now Angela Richardson, Guildford's MP, she has said in an article that she found that local planning was the main issue for the county council election. Do you agree?
Yes and no. I know that's probably a very academic, very political answer. I do think that the local plan has been a significant factor in affecting the way that many people have voted at the local level. Local issues, and particularly when we get to resident association type parties, do tend to really come to the fore when it comes to local elections, but they are by no means the only issues, as it were, that do affect the way that people vote. There are plenty of other pertinent local political issues outside of the local plan that do affect the way that people have voted in Surrey. But I do, as I say, think it's a significant factor, but we must also remember that this is happening within a framework of national politics and, of course, pandemic politics as well, which I suspect is also having an interplay with things that might be more locally understood in quote unquote normal times.
Why don't you think the big ticket items at county council level, in terms of budget at least, adult and children's social care, why don't you think they get more traction with voters?
Partly it is about knowledge amongst voters about who owns those areas, those policy areas, as it were. I do think there is a lack of understanding about the council's responsibility in those areas, and the automatic response is to turn to Westminster and kind of attribute it more to national politics. So I think it's really about creating something distinctively Surrey about these policies and actually increasing that kind of issue ownership by the council, and then that can perhaps interplay into how people end up voting.
Okay, now, if you look at the popular vote in the election, the Conservatives got 42%, but a disproportionately higher number of seats, actually, which allowed them to continue to control the council. The independents also are disproportionately overrepresented in terms of proportional representation at the council. They got 16% of the vote, but 16 of the 81 seats. It was the Lib Dems that lost out this time. Do you think that matters?
Oh, that's a very loaded question, I think. I think it does matter. I think particularly for the Liberal Democrats, they are a party who traditionally do very, very well at local elections. They're incredibly localist in the way that they campaign, and have actually seen some really, really good results in the past when they have really engaged further. And I guess this is probably what we will come on to speak about shortly, but the alliances that happen between the different parties at this election have had an effect on that, essentially. And there are, of course, a great deal of ethical issues around that, you know.
Okay, we're coming on to that, if I may. I just want to add, actually, to my last comment that also the Labour Party, I mean, they had 12% of the popular vote, but only got 2 seats. So they were another party that was lost out on this time round. Okay, but yeah, thank you for bringing that up about the trend with independence. What do you make of it? Is it going to continue?
My suspicion is yes. I think this is part of a wider fragmentation that we are seeing in British politics, that we are seeing perhaps a step away from very traditional party lines, and particularly lines associated with class, and that we are entering not only an environment post-Brexit, where that is a kind of one way in which voters define themselves at local elections, but also crucially the importance of localism and the importance of independence, residents association type parties at British local elections. They're by no means a recent phenomenon, but I think certainly we are definitely seeing a bit of an uptick in terms of their representation, and I would expect this to continue.
Okay, and you also mentioned the importance of alliances. We have seen in some of the Guildford seats where alliances have been formed that they can be effective. But we also saw one seat in Shear where an alliance wasn't formed, and the split vote allowed the Conservative to remain in by a very small majority. What do you think about these alliances? Doesn't it show that actually, if you want to defeat the Conservatives, which have been the dominant party in Surrey, that's what you have to do, but there is a price to pay on the ethics, isn't there?
Yeah, so I think the benefits of these alliances depends about who you are thinking about the benefits for. There are clear electoral benefits for parties in forming alliances, perhaps stepping back to let another party pick up your vote. And that might pay off at a future election. You know, there might be a kind of a compensatory alliance in another seat, for example. But I think fundamentally, when we are talking about an issue with engaging people in local elections in the first place, with these kind of very, very low turnouts and low understanding of local issues, there is a slightly ethical, moral dimension of, are you actually funneling people not unnecessarily necessarily, but are you funneling people towards a non-free choice? You know, really giving people that ability to have their voice heard. I mean, there are dangers, as it were, that if people are continually unable to vote for a candidate that they feel close to, then they might just stop voting altogether. So I think they are beneficial, but they should be used with caution and not constantly.
And I guess it's one of the prices we pay for having first past the post, because if it was a proportional system, then the alliances wouldn't be so popular or necessary.
That is very true. There are many issues, certainly with first past the post. I'm not going to deny that, but I think for many people it is quite simple to understand. And with the change in any electoral system, there's a big learning process for people in understanding how to vote now, how differently things work. You know, where we saw the AV referendum a few years back, there was a kind of a total bemusement or bafflement with what was actually being proposed. So yeah, no electoral system is perfect. A proportional system would reduce the electoral need for alliances, and could actually produce more avenues for voters to engage with parties, and more opportunities for voters to actually get their voices heard in terms of representation. But actually making that jump, that learning process, could be a hurdle too far for many.
Okay, now this is a loaded question, I guess, but if the election was held tomorrow after the publicity around the Cummings interview, do you think the result would be the same?
That is a very interesting question. Possibly not if it was held tomorrow. If it had been held yesterday, perhaps. There is a reaction electorally to scandalous behaviour or perceived misbehaviour, let's say. You know, we see this with by-elections actually, and I've done some work on by-elections, and we see this in Hartlepool. You have a Labour MP in Hartlepool who stepped down because of allegations about his behaviour, his conduct allegations. And where you actually look at by-elections where MPs have stepped down for similar scandalous behaviour, expenses related, personal life related, you see a massive drop off, and it becomes very, very dangerous electorally for parties. When it comes to things more widely in campaigns like Bigotgate, actually, you look at that happening a little distance away from polling day, and you do see the polling pick back up and actually level out for Labour. Obviously, they didn't win the election in 2010. So it is partly about distance between a allegation of scandalous behaviour, the Cummings inquiry submission from the other day, and actually affecting the way that people vote. There is kind of, if there was an election, as I say, held yesterday, it could have had more of an effect than today, where things are becoming that little bit more distant, that little bit more removed, if you like, from our immediate reaction to the political. If it becomes part of a longer, more sustained trend of this type of behaviour, these type of messages about the government, about particular politicians, then we may see this becoming part of a kind of a longer term shift in polling.
Okay, is your prediction that the dust will settle on the Cummings accusations, or will it grow into something that becomes career changing for some people?
I think when it comes to Cummings, I think the dust will settle when he decides to let it settle. I don't imagine that he has fully exposed his supposed dossier of information on Johnson. So there is, and we think about the refurbishment and discussions around the flat in Downing Street, there may be part of this kind of narrative shift towards the Conservative administration. And we're seeing this in the Conservative press as well, that they are becoming a little bit more hostile towards Johnson than they were at the start of his administration. But having said that, every government goes through these kind of blips, as it were. We are potentially a good 3 years away from a general election. So I imagine, you know, a week is a long time in politics. 3 years is practically a century.
Well, it's been fascinating talking to you. You've given us lots of food for thought there, and I hope that you will come back to the Guildford Dragon in the future, and we can have further discussions about the political situation. Dr. Alia Middleton, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.